VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And thanks for tuning into Crosstalk here on VCY America. My name is Jim Schneider, and so often we hear from folk who say thank you for the information we get on Crosstalk. We don't get it from other sources. The mainstream media is not dealing with the issues that are going on, telling us the truth of what's really going on in legislation and what's taking place in Washington, D.C. We're thankful for alternative media. Well, folks, this alternative media is coming under attack, and the days perhaps are numbered as it relates to the freedom in broadcasting like we've appreciated for many, many years. What is afoot? We'll be getting to that here in just a moment. It's our privilege to have back with us on Crosstalk Robert Knight, senior writer and Washington, D.C. correspondent for Coral Ridge Ministries. He is author of the book Radical Rulers, the White House Elites Who Are Pushing America Towards Socialism. Bob, so nice to have you back with us.
Oh, always good to be on Crosstalk, Jim.
Now, you have a special that's coming up this weekend on the Coral Ridge Hour pertaining to the freedoms we have in broadcasting and how they're under threat. What's happening?
Well, the FCC, actually, I just printed out a letter from 3 U.S. senators yesterday. They wrote it on July 20th to the FCC chairman, Janikowski, reminding the chairman that the FCC should be concerned about media ownership rules, and they want more localism. And this is right out of Mark Lloyd's report that he wrote in 2007 when he was a fellow at the Center for American Progress. That's a left-wing group, and he wrote it with the Free Press, which is a group that was begun by Robert McChesney, who's an avowed Marxist, and it was called The Structural Imbalance of Political Talk Radio. And in that report, they basically said, too many people are listening to conservative and Christian talk radio. We've got to do something. Americans are on to the idea that bringing back the fairness doctrine wouldn't be right, so we've got to do it other ways. We've got to insist on localism, that would be localized programming, community boards that monitor programming, and breaking up ownership of the large chains that carry some of the more prominent conservative talk show hosts. And so Mark Lloyd, who co-authored this, is now the chief diversity officer at the FCC and associate counsel, and he's in a perfect position to help promulgate rules to bring this about. So if they can't get in through the front door, strangling talk radio with which they disagree, it looks like they're going to try a number of backdoor approaches. And
this, we should underscore, Bob, is an appointment of President Obama, correct?
Yeah, he's one of the czars.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe he even was vetted by the Senate. And some of the czars are vetted and some aren't. In my book, Radical Rulers, I look at a number of them. And some are vetted, some aren't. Van Jones served on the board of the Free Press. He had to resign as the Green Jobs czar when it was found out that he was a self-avowed communist and truther. And the truthers are the people who believe that the Bush administration actually caused the 9/11 attacks for insidious purposes. But, these are the kind of folks we're dealing with. We've got outright Marxists and socialists in very key positions.
Now, we understand Mark Lloyd. Doesn't he cite Saul Alinsky as being an inspiration to him?
I don't know offhand. I know that he's praised Hugo Chavez of Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I quote him as saying, and he was speaking to a group, and he said, quote, "In Venezuela with Chavez is really an incredible revolution, a democratic revolution, to begin to put into place things that are going to have an impact on the people of Venezuela. The property owners and the folks who then controlled the media in Venezuela rebelled, worked frankly with folks here in the U.S. government, worked to oust him, but he came back with another revolution, and then Chavez began to take very seriously the media in his country." Well, yeah, I'd say he took it seriously. Chavez has shut down 32 opposition radio stations. He put out of business Global Vision, the last opposition television station, and he threatened to arrest the owner of Global Vision, who fled the country. He's seized property anytime he wants. And to show what socialism does for a country in Venezuela, a country that Mark Lloyd seems to admire, they used to export coffee because they have mountainous terrain like Colombia does, and they grow a lot of coffee. And the government moved in, started over-regulating and actually grabbing ownership of part of the coffee industry, and now they have to import coffee just for the people of Venezuela. Socialism doesn't work.
Yeah, and folks, as he underscored, he praised the president of Venezuela, Chavez, who has commandeered various media there, and so this is one that he issues accolades to. And Robert, also the Washington Times quoted him in their article September 23rd, 2009, praising Chavez's rise to power as, quote, an incredible revolution. And if this is really an idol or an icon of his, isn't it true that Mr. Chavez is all about socialism?
Well, I'd say he's actually a communist at this point. He's palled around with Fidel Castro. He's using force to seize property of his opponents. They just march in with armed guards, and they just seize entire homes, businesses, you name it. I mean, he's a thug of the worst order. And for a guy like Mark Lloyd to be admiring of him is a little scary. You mentioned Saul Alinsky, and in fact, I quote Media Research Center. A report saying that Lloyd is in fact a Saul Alinsky disciple. When in Lloyd's book, Prologue to a Farce, Communication and Democracy in America, he calls for an all-out confrontational movement against private media. And he quotes Lloyd as saying, it should be clear by now my focus here is not freedom of speech or the press. This freedom is all too often an exaggeration. At the very least, blind reference to freedom of speech or the press serve as a distraction from the critical examination of other communications policies. Purpose of free speech it's used to prop up global corporations and so forth. In other words, he thinks the idea of freedom of speech is not good because it serves to protect the current free enterprise system, which he is pretty much pledged to destroy and replace with a socialist system.
Do you believe there is indeed a sincere threat right now toward Christian broadcasting, toward conservative talk programming, or is it just kind of a smoke and mirrors thing?
Oh, I think there's a real threat, and I think the FCC is already moving forward. And, it's not just talk radio. Julius Janikowski, the chairman of the FCC, has called for net neutrality, which sounds great on the surface, but what it means is it tells carriers they must carry everything regardless. So carriers would not be able to charge more for very innovative and traffic-heavy technological advances. So that would kind of slow down the development of the Internet. Whenever you put a cap on something and say everybody has to be treated the same, even those who are innovating, you stop innovation. It happens every time. So this net neutrality is a way for the government to actually, I think, eventually try to get into content regulation of the Internet. Now, they should have been doing that in terms of obscenity. They've never taken that seriously. Obscene sites are not protected by the Constitution. They should have shut down the obscene pornography. But I think these folks are more interested in shutting down conservative political views and Christian political views that may conflict with their socialist agenda.
Now, you had mentioned the term localism, and on its face, that sounds like a good term, but when you really get down into the nuts and bolts as to what this thing is and the establishment of community advisory boards, some of the proposals that have come forth would actually require broadcasters to develop a diverse representation on this community advisory board. And the danger for a Christian broadcast station is this, Bob, and that is this would require stations such as this one to bring members of the community on this advisory board who don't even espouse the Christian values and beliefs that we hold to. And so to have a non-Christian group, so to speak, give advice to us as a station, there is great concern there. And right away you'll hear those who will say, well, you don't have to follow the advice of this community advisory board. But Bob, I'm convinced that they will be the first ones lining up to challenge a license renewal, saying, hey, we've given them all this input, and they're refusing to hear from us locally.
Yeah, that's how they do it, and that's how they plan to do it. They plan to put like acorn people on these advisory boards and then have them complain to the FCC at licensing time that they didn't like the programming. It wasn't balanced enough, it wasn't local enough, not enough points of view, especially those Christian stations that are stuck on this biblical Christianity thing and don't allow atheists to come on and Muslims to come on and Zoroastrians to come on and give their point of view. And if you don't think this will have a sympathetic ear at the Supreme Court, look at the decision at the Hastings College of Law in Berkeley just last month, where the Christian Legal Society was told that it must admit atheists as voting members and as leaders, and also practicing homosexuals, or it will be thrown off campus. And when they said, well, look, we don't mind people coming to our meetings, we're open, but in terms of leadership, you can't have people in leadership who espouse exactly the opposite of what the group believes. And the Supreme Court ruled against them.
Yeah,
it was a shocking ruling with Anthony Kennedy on the swing vote. But how about this? What if lawsuits are brought against Christian stations by, say, a Muslim group that says it wants a piece of the airtime, and instead of getting its own station, it wants to force its way onto a Christian programming? I'd hate to see that case go before this particular Supreme Court, given their track record.
Yeah, and then we're seeing under the guise of localism proposals that have come forth. So much percentage of your public service announcements must be devoted to this issue, and so much percentage to this particular issue. Hey, this Mr. Lloyd, I understand that he at one time advocated a 100% tax on broadcast outlets to collect money to provide for alternative viewpoints, i.e. public broadcasting?
Yeah, they actually proposed in that report that the operating budgets of radio stations be taxed at a 100% level to provide funds for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which runs National Public Radio. You know, National Public Radio is huge. That's another thing they don't tell you in these reports that say there are too many conservatives out there. National Public Radio is on 850 stations. It reaches something like 26 million people a week. And they don't even count it in the statistics when they're saying that conservatives are vastly overrepresented on talk radio. But even if you factor in National Public Radio, conservatives still do have the edge, and it's the only medium that conservatives have the edge in. Broadcast television, weekly news magazines, daily newspapers, they're all way out there in terms of liberal ownership and management. And the content is almost uniformly liberal in all other mediums except talk radio, which is why the left is going after it.
Well, folks, that's why programs like this are in peril with the kinds of regulations and background viewpoints that some of these folks have, including this czar at the FCC, Mr. Lloyd, and some of his very, very, what they would call liberal views on these areas. We're going to have a break coming up here in just a moment, and we're going to come back also talking about his views on whites and his statements about their occupying important leadership positions and how he feels that homosexuals ought to have a greater voice as well. You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Stay with us. We're speaking today with Robert Knight, author of the book Radical Rulers, the White House Elites Who Are Pushing America Towards Socialism. We'll be right back.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, how do bacteria become resistant to antibiotics?
Well, Chris, it's certainly not evolution. Many of these bacteria do become resistant to medicinal antibiotics, but probably a minority already had it. A recent study investigated bacteria found in soils. They tested numerous strains against 21 different antibiotics. Most of the bacteria were already resistant to about half of the antibiotics, and some were resistant to a large number of them. These soil bacteria were resistant to chemicals they had never encountered before. Thus, they did not evolve the resistance. Antibiotic resistance is used as evidence for evolution, but as we see, it's nothing of the sort. God designed all life to survive even in hostile environments. It's not evolution, it's really creation, and that happened back in Genesis.
Thanks for joining us for Back to Genesis.